Welcome to Walk With Me, where we journey with others through the challenges they've faced in their life and the lessons they've learned from them. Real people sharing their stories and the wisdom they've gained from a life well lived. And here's your host, Stephanie Bloom.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Can you please share with the audience what your name is and the short title to your story?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. My name is Marcy Langlois, and a short title for my story is called Living Beyond Limits.
I love it. Okay, Marcy, so please share with us, what was your childhood like? What was your normal? What was your family like?
Yeah, so I was born in a really small rural town in upstate Vermont, like on the border of Canada. You could see Canada from my doorstep. And a town of less than 300 people when I was there. And still today, there's no stoplights in that town. And so super small, large families. My mom had 8 kids in her family, and my dad had 7. Grew up as a Catholic, went to a Catholic school. So that's sort of the backdrop of, like where I come from and what our family looked like. But then when we pared it down to, and we talk about my family of origin, my mom, my dad, I have one brother. I was born with a cleft lip and palate, and I was born almost 50 years ago. So at that time, they did not have the technology that they have today. So when I came in the world, no one knew until I arrived that this was going on for me in utero. And so uh, it became a big issue immediately. I was born in a rural hospital, so they shipped me to the university hospital, and I was there for the first 7 days of my life. And cleft lip and palate oftentimes signifies that there's more going on internally in the body. There's likely issues with the heart, the digestive system, a whole bunch of things can be happening. And so they were running all the tests to see if I had other things happening. And what I've come to learn almost 50 years later is that those first 7 days set my entire system, my entire body up for the rest of my life. In the first 90 days that we're alive, it's all about the wiring of our nervous system. And we're wiring to either safety or we're wiring to we're not safe. And so for the first 7 days, I dealt with that. And then I had my first surgery when I was just 3 months old. And that began a lifetime of surgeries. I had my last one when I was 17 years old. So at home, my father was an active alcoholic. We did not have a lot of money at all. There was times in my childhood where we had no running water and no electricity in our house for months on end. And things were tough. My mom was young. My mom was only 19, and she had my brother 19 months before she had me. So she was a young mom. Um, and then contending with my father in addition to that without a lot of resources. And so that's sort of what was going on. And then I was sick. I was sick all the time. Literally, I was at the doctor's. I started seeing a dentist immediately as soon as I had teeth. I had braces on when I was in kindergarten, and I got them off when I was a senior in high school. Um, I was just, it was constant. I needed something constantly. I was fed with an eyedropper for the first several months that I was alive, because when you have cleft lip and palate, you have no palate and your lip doesn't close, so you can't suck. So no bottle or no breast. And so things that was that's sort of like the best metaphor for what my childhood looked like, is that I always was in need of something. And I never felt safe, right? My father was very unpredictable, and things in my house were always very unpredictable. And I'm trying to navigate this whole thing of I don't feel safe, I don't feel well. People are looking at me all the time, trying to figure out what's going on with me,
Mhm.
what might be wrong with me. often not asking, just that staring, which in some ways is worse than someone just saying, whatever name comes to mind for them. Um, so that's sort of the backdrop. And then as I went through school, I realized really early on, um, I didn't have the verbiage at the time, but I realized very early on that I was definitely a lesbian. I was not attracted to boys. I was definitely attracted to the same sex girls. And I just was sitting in a Catholic school wondering, well, what do we do now? Right. And I remember praying to God every night that this wasn't true, that really I wasn't going to be this person. And I just kept thinking there was something wrong with me. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me exactly, but something is wrong with me. And being in a small town and in a very rural area in New England, there was no diversity, at all. So I didn't see other people that were like me. So there was no context to have anything normalized for me, really, in any way. Um, so as I went along, I kept trying to suppress that and just kept thinking, I'm just going to act like I like boys and maybe I will, right? Like maybe I can convince myself. And went on into high school. In middle school, I really started actually dabbling with drugs and alcohol, mostly alcohol at that time. And then by the time I went to high school, um, things really kicked off for me in that regard. And so I had always been an athlete all of my life. I loved sports. It was like it for me. It was my release. It was a place that made me feel normal. It was the place that I could exceed and excel at. And so I felt like I belonged. It made me forget, some of the things that I was contending with. And so I loved sports. It was everything for me. And I was really committed. And I was actually very good at pretty much anything with a ball. And so when I got to high school, I made the varsity team my freshman year in basketball. And I was so excited and all of these things. And then we had some tragedy within our schools. Some of my brother's friends and one of my good friends all died in two separate car accidents within 19 days of each other. We lost three kids in our little school. And that was so impactful for me. It really shattered me, actually. And I started really like questioning the meaning of life after all I had already been through, why these kids had died so young. We knew their parents, their families, their siblings, right? Like, and to see the torment that occurred in these people's lives was so heavy for my heart at such a young age. And so I just sort of really, that kind of like caused me to give up some, right? Like, I started focusing on drinking and smoking pot a lot, and decided that basketball wasn't it for me anymore. And I ended up quitting the team. And then slowly I quit each sport after that. And then I really just sort of started dedicating my life to checking out, being high in whatever way I could, whatever substance I could get my hands on is what I was going to do and use. And so after that, that was like the beginning, I think, of my addiction. And then as my high school went on, high school was particularly brutal for me. With a cleft lip and palate, the surgeries are performed as you grow, as your body is changing and developing. So because they have to reconstruct your face. And so you have to wait until certain periods in your growth cycle for them to be able to operate. And so I had brutal surgeries in my high school years. I had my jaws broke, both upper and lower. And then because my underbite was so severe, they ended up having to re-break it a second time. So I went through that, and my nose was reconstructed and plates and screws. I mean, the whole thing. And so I had so many major surgeries just in high school alone. And I got to my senior year and I was like, I'm like onto a new road, right? I had started putting in college applications and things started moving forward. And I thought, okay, like, here's my chance, right? Like, I'm going to shut the door on all of these experiences and I'm going to get to like live a normal life because now this medical stuff is behind me. But all along, I was still not well. Like, I've always been like low key chronically ill from the very beginning. And, but still, compared to having surgeries and going to the dentist every week and speech lessons, right, it still felt like I had arrived, right? And so I was so excited. It was my senior year. I had an after school job and I was on my way to my after school job on the afternoon of January 31st, 1994. And I got in a car accident. I don't need to go into all the details, but I got in a car accident that afternoon. A man pulled out in front of me. He never saw me, and I could not do anything to avoid him. And unfortunately, this still is very tender for me to talk about, obviously. Um, but unfortunately, the three passengers that were in his car that day all died. And so that was, y- it's still hard for me to even put words to what that did to me and how that um, completely undid me in every way. And my whole life in that moment, literally in 1 second, my whole life changed. It went from, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a degree in something, and I'm going to do something, to waking up the next morning and believing that I killed three people. And I said that to myself every day, and I believed that. And even though I was not found at fault in any regard and I had no responsibility for the accident, legally speaking, um, because my car hit his car, I don't know. I don't know that it would have really mattered what the circumstances were around it, right? I was alive and they were not. And so for me, that became this thing that I weaponized against myself and took full responsibility for the loss of these people's lives. And that's when I plummeted into addiction. Like, I had dabbled and I knew I definitely had a problem very early on because I never drank just one drink or excuse me, I was always looking to completely get obliterated. So, but this became now my life's sole purpose, right? Is to just completely check out. And truthfully, it was because I wanted to punish myself. I did not believe that I deserved to breathe the air that I was breathing. I didn't think that I deserved to be alive. And I definitely didn't think that I deserved anything good.
Mm.
And so that's how I woke up every morning, literally. And and then, right, what we think and what we believe is what we become.
Mhm.
And so that's the life I created, right? I found other addicts who were active in their addiction, and I surrounded myself with people like that. And I went way down the road with that and dug myself a pretty deep hole. And those are that's kind of like from 0 to 18 what it really looked like, and then as um the days went by, really nothing a- looked a whole lot different, right? I woke up every day with the mission um to punish myself and hopefully to take myself out, and but just never accomplished that. And I moved to Florida. There was a pending lawsuit that went on for 4 years, which was brutal because these lives were lost. And so, right, there were insurance companies and attorneys and families and estates. And so I lived in that for 4 more years, right, of this just no more, maybe like I haven't thought about it for a day or two, and the phone rings and it's another attorney needing some statement, right? Like, so I lived in Florida for 4 years while that was all going on. And then I left there and headed to Colorado. And when I got to Colorado, things were really bad. I was in a very bad state and I was drinking and using every day I didn't do anything unless I was loaded, literally. And then, what ended up happening is I met this woman and she had a little girl and, Brianna, and, we've been together for 23 years. Well, it will be 23 years in like a week that we've been together. And Brianna was 8 years old when we got together. And I've raised her like my own. And I decided to get sober because I saw so clearly that I was doing to Brianna what was done to me. Right. I was active in addiction. And I picked her up from school one day and I was driving back to the bar with her, which is what my father did with me. And it was like a 2x4 across the head in that moment. Like, oh my God, I'm literally doing to her what was done to me. And I choose not to do this. And that was it. I think it was about 10 days or so later, I went to my first 12-step meeting and I've never touched a drop of alcohol since that day. And that was 21 years ago. And that was the beginning, right? I thought that was like the end, right? I thought I was going to ride off into the sunset and like our life was going to be amazing because I got sober. But that was just the beginning. And it was the beginning of starting to understand what I was dealing with, what the nature of it all was that I was dealing with, right? Alcohol was the symptom. It wasn't the problem, right? It was just pointing me. It was the flashing red light trying to let me know, hey, Marcy, like there's something here that needs your attention, right? And so I got sober. And then when I got sober, I got really, really sick. All the stuff in my body that had been holding now came full force. And I had insomnia, I had heart palpitations, I had psoriasis covering 75% of not 75, excuse me, my legs were really bad, about probably like 40% of my body. I was having like anywhere from 10 to 15 panic attacks a day. I had this chronic sinus infection that would not go away. So every day I'd wake up and felt like I had the flu. I mean, you name it, I had it going on. And Western medicine couldn't fix me. And I went to a naturopath under my friend's recommendation. And they ask your trauma history.
Yeah,
Well,
we do. I'm a board certified drugless practitioner. That's absolutely what we do.
oh my goodness, I had no idea. Okay, well, here you go. You know all about it then. So, your intake form is like 74 pages, right? Because you got to know the whole story because the body works all together.
Yep.
Nothing is separate.
No, it's so silly that everything is a different ology or a different ologist. The way I look at it is that humans are more like soup. If you put too much salt in the soup, it affects the whole soup. Don't put too much salt in the soup.
Yes, that's a great analogy. I love that. That's exactly it. So I was so overwhelmed just by the intake, right? Like, so I just knocked on our door and I said, look, if you really need this filled out, like I'm gonna have to make a couple of appointments and come back because there's not enough time to tell you everything in writing. So she said, come on in and let's just talk about it. So I tell her my story, which took like basically the whole appointment. And she said, I'm so glad that you're sober. I really find it almost hard to believe that you are. And with all that you're dealing with and that you haven't gone back to alcohol. She said, but here's what the story is. What's happening in your body is all the trauma that's stored in there. And I can't give you enough supplements, medications, whatever to help you. What needs to happen is you need to deal with the trauma, and I can help support your body as you're trying to deal with the trauma. So I'm like, okay, so what do I got to do? She's like, you got to go to therapy. And I'm like, what do you mean? Right. I was so mad. I was so mad and just incensed, right? Like I've worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've done all this stuff. What do you mean? She's like, your body's telling me, right? If you can't see it, I can. And you asked me what I meant, and this is what I'm telling you. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy because I'm going to show you that I don't need it. And I went defiantly, literally, to show her that she was wrong. And see, because this is such a really important point right here to make that I don't think of making very often is that trauma does not show up the way in which I thought trauma shows up. I thought that if I was a highly traumatized person, then that would mean that every day I would wake up agonizing over what happened to me, right? Like I would literally maybe replay it. And the car accident I did, the car accident was like a movie in my mind. Um, for a number of years, but eventually that did fade. And so I'm like, I don't even think about having all those surgeries. I don't care that my dad was an alcoholic. Like what happened in the past is the past, right? Like all these things. And but that's not how trauma shows up, right? Trauma changes the state of the body, right? It changes the frequency of the body, right? Which then sets us up for disease and illness and all the other things that come along with that, depression, anxiety, all of it, right? So that's what I didn't understand because I thought if the trauma was bothering me, then you would know it and so would I, right? Because that's what I talk about and obsess about, but that's not how it works. Sorry about that. That's not how it works. That's not how it shows up. And so that's what I learned when I went to therapy, right? So I started going to therapy and it was great. And that's a whole long story. And I've been everywhere and I've done everything that I could find to help myself when I really started to understand the nature of how trauma affects the body. I mean, I've done two outpatient stays at the Meadows, which is a world-renowned facility for addiction and trauma. I've I've done literally EMDR, holistic reprocessing, all of it, everything I could find to try to help myself. I've done it. I've taken every supplement there is. I've worked with every kind of energy healer and modality that I could find. And what happened is 3 years ago, I almost died. And I ended up with an autoimmune condition. Well, whatever you want to call it, it's debatable what they call it, but histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome. And so I ended up with that. And see, what happened is that I got into, when I stopped drinking, I started working. So I replaced drinking for working,
Yep.
right? And I was in sales. And there is no place worse for somebody like me than in sales because I'm an addict and I don't know moderation. And I get my worth and my value from what I do, not who I am.
Right.
So, right, the more accolades I could get in my career, the more I wanted to do it, the more I just dove in and dug deeper. And I worked myself basically to death. So I had all this chronic illness going on and kept trying to treat it with my naturopathic doctor, taking all the supplements, doing all the modalities and whatever, and nothing was working. I wasn't getting well. And I was getting worse, actually, right? By the time December 2021 rolled around, I had 5 systemic bacterial infections in my body.
Wow.
Right? No wonder I had histamine intolerance and
Yeah.
mast cell activation syndrome, right? I was so sick. I was so sick, but I was working, from the time I opened my eyes until the time I stopped. And my doctor said, like, when are you going to stop? Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to work 2 hours less every day. Right. Well, 2 hours less when the body is already in that completely overwhelmed state was not nearly enough. And never mind that the level of stress that I had because I'm a mortgage banker, which is 7 days a week and it's high stress, constant, right? So I'm in this state already. I have a very dysregulated, fragmented nervous system. I have a body that's full of illness and disease that's not detoxing correctly. And I won't stop, right? Same thing. It's the same thing as when I was drinking, it's just working.
Right.
And so it got to be the beginning of February, and I was having tremors in my brain, and I could not tell if the desk that I was sitting at was moving or if I was moving. Like, that's how bad my nervous system was. And I did this all through the month of January and half of December. And finally, at the beginning of February, I called my manager and I said, I can't do that. Like, I literally cannot do this one more minute. Like, I cannot. And I left work that day and I was supposed to take a long weekend to try to recuperate. And I became bedridden for the next 40 days. And it was like I died, really, right? Like, I left my work and everybody thought I was going to be gone for 3 days. I have a whole team, I have a whole staff, I have a whole thing, right? And no one can call me because I am so sick, I cannot talk on the phone. Uh, you know, I'm not anaphylactic, but moving that way, right? The throat's tightening, all of the symptoms are coming, right? But I never had an anaphylactic shock, thank God. Um, but if you'd bring the cell phone in the bedroom, then the tremors would increase, my throat would start to tighten, right?
So in my role in my day job, I work for a program where we help people detox their body at a cellular level. And the way
Mm.
I explain it to people is that every human has a different stress tolerance level. In my mind, I picture it like a bucket. So some people have a small bucket, some people have a big bucket. But when you are full, when your stress bucket is full, that is it. Your body is shutting down. Good luck. I feel like that's where you were at.
It was dire. I mean, it was dire. And no one knew exactly what was going on with me. I mean, we knew, right, some of the things, but we didn't know it was histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome because I was having multi symptom failure, right? My heart would be erratic and then I couldn't breathe, right? And then it was my vision, the acuity was gone in my vision.
Then your equilibrium
Insomnia.
with all this shaking that's going on, like your whole body was just screaming at you.
Literally. And I couldn't do anything, right? I literally, for the first time in my life, every time, right? The surgery, I got back up. The car accident, I got back up. The addiction, I got back up, right? But this time I wasn't getting up. And that was terrifying,
Absolutely.
right? It was terrifying to be at that place that I could not will myself enough, right? No amount of grit, no amount of nothing, right? And today I can say that this was my turning point. Up until this moment in my life, this was my turning point, right? You would think, based on all the things I've already said, there were a lot of others, and they were, right? But this was the one, because this is the one that has brought me to where I am today, to want to be here with you today to talk about what I believe in, what my experience has been. And that is it really, whatever our stories are, we all have one, and they're all painful, right? To some degree or another, some more, some less, whatever, right? But, and mine may sound very different from others or whatnot, but what is always the same is the emotion behind it, right? We all, when I say I'm sad, you know what sadness feels like, right? When I say that I've had panic, you know what panic feels like, right? It doesn't matter what the precipitating incident was that brought that about, but that's what happens. And that's where we connect and relate, right? And I think that's so important as humans, is that we all know that we all suffer and we're all connected by that suffering, right? And so I went on to spend 40 days in bed. I had 3 nights in a row that I almost died. I felt like I was dying. I don't know if I really almost died, but I felt like I was dying. And it was during COVID. And with what was going on with me, there was no way I was going to the hospital. Uh, because if I got COVID, I was dead. There was no doubt, right? I already had a cytokine storm going on in my own body. I didn't need anybody else's, you know? And so, um, those nights were the most pivotal in my life. Um, if you believe in a power greater than yourself or whatever energy, the universe, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, that was my moment. Those were my moments. It was my awakening. It was my place of final surrender. Like, if I'm going to die right here, because there's no option, right? Going to the hospital is not an option. Um, and there's nothing I can do at home. I've done everything that I can do right here in my bed, and there's nothing more that I can do. So if I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And there's something so powerful about that. To look death in the eye, or presumed death, whatever you want to say, right? To look it in the eye and to accept, right? To literally accept, this is it. This is where you've come, Marcy. All of your choices up until this moment has brought you here, right? And so what are you going to do now, right? None of the accolades mean anything. None of the, bank account means anything, right? None of that's going to save you. In this moment, if you're dying, you're dying. And from that moment forward, things started to turn around slowly, very slowly, but surely. And within a month, I was back at work, and I went back to work an hour a day. And I'm very proud to report that I am still working, but I only work 2 hours a day. I went back to work for 2 hours a day, and I said, this is what I can do to not end up back where I was, right? This is what I know I can do. And I have a wonderful, amazing, amazing team that makes this possible. And I know that I'm so blessed and fortunate that most people could not do these things. And I want to acknowledge that. But that's what I've done for myself, right? And really what I did is committed my entire life to healing myself, right? And you'd think, right, all the things that I've named that I've done, that I would be healed. No. So here's the thing, and this is what I really want to talk about today, right? Is what we think, what we believe, and how we feel creates our reality. And that means our body, right? Our body is in that reality. So remember, I said I spent the first 7 days of my life in the hospital having all these tests run. And then, like right around the 90th day of the nervous system being finished rewiring or wiring in my body, I had my very first surgery, right? That connection that I've made to that trauma, those traumas and experiences in my life are the crux of who I am. I have spent the last 48 years of my life letting that, 7-day-old infant run my life, right? That terrified, not having enough, not feeling safe, not feeling like they are enough. All of those things are the place that I've been operating my life from, which has driven me to overwork, to drink, to numb, to, right? To look for relief in any outlet or way that I could find it. So the last 3 years, I've studied lots of great teachers. Dr. Joe Dispenza, I don't know if you're familiar with him. I did like 3 meditations of his a day. So I meditate like 3 hours a day. Dr. Kim Dioramo, she's amazing. Dr. Lisa Rankin is amazing. Deepak Chopra, Gabor Mate, right? There's so many resources that I can provide for people to figure out what the nature of my problem is. And the nature of my problem is that when my physical state was changed at the very beginning of my life, that set me up for all of these other things. And that if I can just take a minute and I can go back and retrieve those parts of myself that have been fragmented, then I can heal. And so today, I'm so, amazed at the resiliency of the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? I say it to my doctor every time I talk to her, which is about every 3 to 4 weeks, and all the practitioners that I really can't believe this. I mean, I really can't believe this. I have not taken any supplements. I've had no medical intervention at all since when I was in bed for those 40 days. I've had no intervention because what happened is my nervous system was so fragmented that I could not take anything. Right. It would create a reaction.
Yep.
So I couldn't have anything. Right.
Yeah.
So the way that I've healed my body is by changing my mind, by healing those parts of myself, by becoming aware of what my thoughts are, right? I didn't realize that I spent all day long in a state of hypervigilance. I didn't realize that I would tell myself, like my wife would say, hey, do you want to go to this concert? My first thought, as soon as she said, do you want to go to this concert, would be, are we going to be safe when we're there? What if we run into a drunk driver on the way home? What, right? Like literally assessing danger all the time. Where's the danger, right? For a simple situation that most people take for granted, my response is always, where's the danger in that situation?
That's because that was your baseline. Your baseline was living from that fight or flight, fawn or freeze through no fault of your own. You were an infant, with a serious medical condition that blew away your little community, right? They didn't know how to handle this. You had to go to the big hospital. Like, that's a big deal, right? And you're so right that blueprint that you were given is what you continue to play. But the great part is that when you finally realized that you can fix it, and it takes intention and it takes attention, but look where you are now.
Yeah. It's literally unbelievable. So my body is like, I'm about 95% of the way healed. I'm at the point that everything is normal in my life except food. So I was down to, just so the audience understands, I was down to the only thing I could eat was boiled potatoes. Literally, the only thing I could eat was boiled potatoes. And like some people end up on a feeding tube with these conditions because they're stuck. And like I kept saying to my doctor, if this is really what I have, like what's the deal? And she's like, Marcy, all we can do is make you as comfortable as we can and give you the highest quality of life, because most people do not recover from this. Most people go from bad to worse, truly. And I get why and how that happens, because it's so anxiety producing to live with it. So it takes so much intentionality with your thoughts and your feelings to overcome this. So once I started, for a long time, I've read about how, what we think and what we believe creates our life, right? I mean, I love Louise Hay and Dr. Wayne Dyer and, all those people, right? I love those people, and I've read so many of their books, and I believed it per se, but I didn't really believe it. Like, I mean, everyone has stress. Everyone gets worked up, right? So I kept thinking like, there's got to be a caveat somewhere in that information, right? But when I was in bed for those 40 days, and when Tracy would bring the cell phone in and the tremors in my brain would increase by tenfold, and then she'd leave with the cell phone, and my body would relax. And then I noticed when I would get worked up about not being able to go back to work and like concerned about my staff and my clients and all of this stuff, that everything would get way worse. But then as soon as I would be focused on my breathing and just relax in the bed, just this is where you're at. You can't change it, Marcy, and just keep surrendering over and over and over surrendering, right? Then my body would calm down. So as I literally firsthand got to see how what I was thinking when I was feeling was doing to my physical being. So I know there's no caveat to it. What we think and what we feel and what we believe is what our body produces chemicals to correspond with. And so this is how I healed myself. This is literally how I healed myself. So I have done a map of my GI again, blood work, the whole thing. I have no infections anywhere in my body, right? I have no symptoms of histamine intolerance. I mean, it's, full on summer here today, 85 degrees. My patio is covered with pollen and I sit out there like a boss. No running eyes, no dripping, nothing, right? No tremors, no nothing. The last part of my healing is literally just the food, and that takes time. And that's scary and intimidating for me, honestly, because I had like hundreds of reactions before we understood what I was dealing with. And so it's very intimidating to do that. But again, that's in my mind and that's in what I believe and feel. So I constantly work with myself and reintroduce the food and then wait and right. So what my whole point is today, I think, is that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter how dark the day is or the night, there's always hope, right? If you just stay the course, right? There's another opportunity. I don't know when that will come for you. I didn't know when it would come for me. I I have white knuckled it for so long, just trying to hang on, hoping that maybe there's a better day. And I know that there is because I've lived it and I've walked it. And in the most hopeless, most despairing situations that I've ever found myself in, I have found them to be my greatest teacher every single time, without doubt. And I can say today, and most people will think that I may be crazy to say this, but I would do this all again. I wouldn't change one thing because I have this spiritual path that tells me that what has happened is what is supposed to be. It's for my highest evolution. My job here on this planet is to evolve to be the greatest being I can be, right? And I believe that's to open my heart as wide as I can and to love unquestionably all people, all things, to respect, right? And I think we can only get there by having whatever experiences we have. It's going to either open our heart or it's going to close our heart, right? And I spent the first 27 years of my life with a closed heart. My body didn't like that. So that's really what I have to share today.
Marcy, that is an incredible story. Like, you have been to so many valleys and it has been dark several times. And just your human spirit, got you through a lot of that because it just the way our body's designed, that fight or flight is good in certain situations, but once you become aware of how there needs to be balance, right? Like, your body shut down and for those 40 days you rested. Your body wasn't going to let you do anything else because your stress bucket was absolutely overflowing. And
Mhm.
and at that point your body was just like, "Nope, we're done here. Either we do it this way or we don't do it at all, Marcy. What are you going to decide?" And you made the right decision, right? Like, you put effort and attention and intention in your actions. And you're here to share a really remarkable story. So I'm grateful for your time and attention today. I really appreciate you sharing those valleys with us because so many people feel like it's the darkest days and there's never going to be light again, and
Mhm.
to share a story where it's been really dark and it keeps getting bright again is really helpful. So thank you for that, Marcy. As we wrap up our time together today, are there
Mhm.
any like resources or support you'd like to offer, or any links to your own works, anything at all that you want to put out there into the world to make it a better place?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for just acknowledging, my story and my path. I appreciate that. My highest intention is that it will help somebody else. If I just help one person, then, I feel like the mission has been served. So thank you for this. In terms of like, offerings and what I have, I'm literally right in the middle of a transition. If you can go to my website, marcylanglois.com, and on there, you can contact me there. You can directly contact me, and I am the one that responds to those emails. And so if you need something, you can reach out. I'm developing, and I will have it up and running like in the next literally week or two, some different coaching packages to help people work through their stuff. And I'm hoping to have different price points and different levels and a whole bunch of different things. So I will literally have that in place by like the end of June. So
Okay.
if you just email me directly or sign up for my newsletter or one of those two things, then I'll be sure to be able to connect with you.
I will definitely put all of the easy links in the show notes so people can connect with you very easily. Marcy, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and your light with us today. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.